Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Logan Crawford, and this is the award-winning TV talk show right here on Ebru Fresh Outlook. European investigators who analyzed the black boxes from the Russian plane that went down last weekend in Egypt are categorically saying the crash is not an accident. This according to a CNN affiliate in France. The investigators say the cockpit voice recorder of Metrojet Flight 9268 shows an explosion, and the flight data recorder confirms the explosion was not accidental. Let's say hello to the Fresh Outlook think tank. I am joined by Albert Goldson, president of Indo-Brazilian Associates, and also Dr. Alain Sanders, professor of political science at St. Peter's University. Albert, I'll begin with you. What's your take on what happened to this plane? First off, take the broad question.
Well, considering the investigation has not been completed yet. However, all signs indicate that there was sort of an explosive device somehow smuggled onto the aircraft, and that resulted in a catastrophic tragedy.
Absolutely. And Alan, when I first heard about this, you know, as the armchair detective, as journalists often are, I'd say, well, you've got Putin attacking ISIS in Syria, and you've got a plane that went down over Egypt, and you've got a group aligned with ISIS claiming responsibility. This looks like an ISIS attack.
Well, it certainly looks like it has all the hallmarks of an attack. I mean, we need the definitive proof, and the proof is starting to pile up that it probably was a bomb or at least a catastrophic event. But catastrophic events, when planes are cruising, only about 10% of aircraft accidents occur at that stage of a flight. So it looks increasingly like a bomb. And if it is determined that it is so, then of course it has huge political implications. It has political implications for Putin and his involvement in the Middle East. It has implications for us because we're involved in all kinds of conflicts there. And of course for Egypt, which is a very unstable regime at the moment. So all of the political players are going to have to reassess what this means, what their strategy should be in the Middle East, and how to secure the safety of airline passengers.
Albert, in this post 9/11 attack where we beefed up security at airports around the world, this downing of a Russian jet, if it indeed is terrorism, and all facts point to that at this point, shows that we're not very effective.
Well, interestingly enough, there are security systems set up at airports all throughout the world. Interestingly enough, they of course establish minimums as far as security is concerned. However, in certain countries, in certain regions, there's what's called the perception of a threat. For example, in New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, of course, we have a very high level of security procedures and protocol. However, we have smaller commuter shuttle planes on turboprops going from one Midwest city to the other, in which you do not have that high level of security. In Egypt, in this situation, you have a resort that's quite close to a lot of militant and terrorist activity that's going on. And the primary culprit might be the Sinai province, which is aligned with ISIS, and they have the technical capabilities to be able to infiltrate airport security and possibly plant an explosive device on the aircraft.
Alan, Putin is far from being a wimp. We would think he is going to react to this and react to this strongly. Perhaps this now also gives him the moral authority to go ahead and attack within Iran and Syria and Iraq.
Well, certainly in the short run, I think it strengthens his hand because with any leader, when your country is attacked, and if it is presumed that this airliner was attacked or it is shown that it was attacked, you get a rally around the leader kind of effect. This happens in the United States, and one could expect it to happen in Russia. So it will strengthen his hand. So in the short run, he might feel that he should react militarily and with power. But in the long run, he has to figure that what does this mean in the long term for the security of Russia? Russia has had a lot of incidents, terrorist incidents around Chechnya, with the insurgencies in all parts of the country. And of course, now that ISIS is on their enemies list, then ISIS, of course, is going to try and strike back. So in the short run, I think you will see Putin's power strengthen. But in the long run, he has to figure out how to secure the safety of his country. And just as we have had problems figuring out how to do that best, I think he will find he has similar issues.
This is also a new phase of attack for ISIS. They've been effective on the ground in taking over countries and grabbing land and seizing power. But now they've actually, if they are indeed responsible for this, they've struck a international power, superpower, Russia.
The interesting change in tactics are as follows. It seems like almost every single terrorist group in the Middle East or elsewhere pretty much claims we are ISIS, even if it's just communications via email, some sort of allegiance. Again, the primary group would be the Sinai province. Their tactics have primarily been going after Egyptian military targets as well as infrastructure, and they primarily use explosive devices as well as large car bombs. And of course, for them technically to be able to get an explosive device onto an aircraft, a passenger aircraft, signifies a different level, because now they're going after, or whoever the group is, going after a civilian aircraft. And ironically, it targets specifically a Russian passenger plane.
Right, people returning from holiday.
Right,
Which is
and the other thing is that the Sharm el-Sheikh airport was touted as one of the most secure, one of the best airports in Egypt. And apparently, if there was a terrorist bomb there, it wasn't as secure as people thought it would be. The other aspect to this, of course, is the instability of the Egyptian regime. So we can talk about what this means for Putin and what this means for the United States, but equally importantly is what does this mean for Mr. Sisi, the president of Egypt. It's a very unstable regime right now, and this does not help him assert sovereignty of the state over all parts of his territory, most importantly Sinai.
And Albert, Egypt is largely dependent on tourism dollars, and I can't imagine anyone taking a vacation to Egypt to see the pyramids right now.
The big blow is Egypt relies on different sources of income. The biggest one, of course, is foreign aid. They also depend on remittances from Egyptian workers overseas. They also have some sort of a small oil exporting industry. And another huge one is tourism. They had expected to bring in about $10 billion worth of tourism this year. Of course, $8 billion this year. However, that's down from $13 billion before the Arab Spring. Now, the problem is, at this particular resort, they derive a third of their tourism income right from that resort. Here's where the squeeze comes in. Egypt is at a historic low for foreign reserves. They have $16 billion in foreign reserves, which will last them 90 days for foodstuffs, imports, etc. So with Putin suspending all flights, the Brits and other Europeans suspending flights to this particular resort will put a huge damper on Egyptians' revenue stream and really put a tremendous pressure on the regime and the Egyptian economy.
So this just makes a big mess in the Middle East even messier.
Absolutely, but of course the possible bright spot to all this is now that Russia may have been hit by a terrorist attack, it may be more willing to sit down and be constructive at an international conference. Syria has bedeviled all of the parties to try to find an agreement, but now that everybody has suffered something, and if indeed the Russians have suffered great loss here, they may be more willing to reach a compromise and to figure out what would be a good solution for Syria. Now they have backed Mr. Assad for one very important reason, and that is he provides them with an air base and a navy base on the coast of Syria. And for Russia, that's very important. And so they view Syria as part of their sphere of influence. But having attacked ISIS and now possibly having been attacked in return, they may be willing to find some sort of solution and some sort of interim arrangement that eases Mr. Assad out and that creates some sort of coalition government. But you know, the Middle East is made up of many factions. So having said that, how easy will it be? Not very. But on the other hand, if everybody's nose is bloodied a little bit, then perhaps there's greater willingness to see if a compromise can be reached.
Albert, a lot of people say that toppling Gaddafi was a mistake in hindsight. Toppling Saddam Hussein was a mistake in hindsight. Is toppling Assad in hindsight going to be a mistake as well? I mean, it seems like you have utter chaos in the region ever since he let go of his iron-fisted grip on the nation.
Well, you have good news, bad news. You can remove Assad, but keep the current infrastructure as far as his regime is concerned, as far as the military, economics, etc. You need some sort of stability. Removing Assad, of course, will be very important. If you remove the entire regime, Assad, as well as all his cronies, then you will have another failed state, another chaotic situation. Basically, the bottom line is just going to be nothing more than, as someone once told me, flypaper for terrorists to pour in, and you have another unstable region that's going to result in utter chaos, and that will exacerbate the refugee crisis of millions of people from the Middle East, particularly Syria, leaving that area and overwhelming Europe.
With Assad gone, you can't imagine, at least I can, that the rebels would actually take over power, that it would actually be ISIS in their military might. So we have this three-way civil war going on where we sort of back the rebels, but half-heartedly. And Russia backs Assad and seems to be striking at both ISIS and the rebels. So this is a mess.
And it is a mess, and nobody really knows what the final solution will be to this mess. It may be that Syria may not be able to be put back together. It's kind of a Humpty Dumpty situation, and we may have several mini-states emerge from Syria. Of course, nobody wants that to happen because that would ensure that there would be continued conflict. But you probably want to get rid of Assad. I mean, the man is a war criminal. I think the evidence is overwhelming. But his infrastructure and his supporters may not necessarily be war criminals, but even if they are an important part of the solution. One of the big mistakes we made in Iraq is once we got rid of Saddam Hussein, we got rid of everything that was Saddam Hussein, and that left a power vacuum. And so what you want to do here is to remove the head of the snake, so to speak, but you also want to be sure that there's no power vacuum. That's going to be very difficult to do. But I think now that all the powers that are involved directly or indirectly in Syria understand that this is a problem and it's going to hurt them and their citizens in a very real way, there may be an incentive to come to a conference table and to try to reach a settlement that will provide some sort of stability. But in the Middle East, nothing is certain.
Albert, we've been accepting the premise that this is likely terrorism. It's possible that it's not. Russian aviation has a horrible history. They have I believe, an unprecedented number of accidents and mishaps. This plane had a hard landing just a number of years ago where the tail was basically broken off and then put back on again. Is it safe to fly on a Russian airline?
There are many countries, including Russia, that it is not safe to fly simply because the aircraft itself is an Airbus A320, and that series it has an excellent safety record, probably one of the best. And just to give you an idea how ubiquitous the A320 is, there's one of those aircrafts either taking off or landing every 30 seconds, 24 hours a day. The problem is it comes with maintenance, and many countries apply just the minimal maintenance required to the aircraft. Many of the technicians are not retrained, so there really applies a lot of problems. The aircraft also had a hard landing in Cairo. That's where the tail situation came in, so that might have exacerbated the structure integrity of the aircraft, and it may not have been looked at very carefully. So again, that could also be a possibility. So until the investigation is completed, then we'll get the final answer on what caused the crash.
Alan, one of the things we're looking at in this crash investigation is whether or not an employee at the airport or for the airline actually perpetrated this potential bombing. Your thoughts on the vulnerability of airports and airlines at the hands of workers?
Well, I mean, we've had several incidents here in the United States, test runs, so to speak, and sometimes lone wolves kind of attempts to try to get through security. And sad to say, several attempts have succeeded. That is to say, people have managed to smuggle things onto airplanes. So I would think that that's a real possibility, and that's what you really want to look at. And of course, in a country like Egypt, where exchange of money, which we might consider to be bribery, is rife in the general way of doing things, that certainly is a possibility. And it's frightening, and I think that's why you see so many of the countries that have air service to Sharm el-Sheikh suspend that, at least until a little bit more is known. How you stop that is very problematic, particularly when you've got a society like Egypt where, as I say, exchange of money, which we might perhaps consider bribery, is so rife.
All right. Alan, Albert, thank you so much for your time and insight. We'll have more from you later on in the program. When we come back, we're going to take a look at a potentially deadly ingredient affecting a popular Mexican restaurant chain. More on that after this.